Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our annual Latinx Heritage Month Speaker. My name is Cesar Barrios, and I'm the Program Advisor in the Multicultural Center at the University of Southern Indiana. I'd like to first thank all of you for taking time out of your evening to join us. I know that the evening hours are typically spent with family or friends, but I promise that your time here tonight will be well spent. I would also like to thank all of those who have supported this event in one way or another, from students to faculty and staff and community members. I also would like to thank my supervisor, Executive Director Pamela Hobson, for giving me the opportunity to always explore new ideas and for continuously supporting this event. Additionally, I would also like to thank Dr. Khalila Doss, Vice President of Student Affairs, and President Ronald Rashawn for always supporting us in our efforts to better serve our Latinx students on our campus. As a Latino, specifically a Nicaraguan American, I find much joy in hosting this event. Um, Growing up in Southern Indiana, the Latinx population was never very large. And it wasn't until about 10 to 15 years ago that I started to notice a growth in Evansville, in Huntingburg, Jasper, Dale, and Washington, Indiana, which are all very close, about 50 minutes away from each other. Although the majority of Latinos in Southern Indiana are of Mexican descent, it is not rare to find Latinos from other countries such as Panama, Colombia, Venezuela, Cuba, Ecuador, Bolivia, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Puerto Rico, and many others. This month, and really every day, we should embrace each culture and identity from each of these countries. I encourage you to celebrate this month, not by going to Hacienda or in saying that you're embracing Mexican food, because we all know that that's not really Mexican food, right? But by meeting people with different Latin American backgrounds and heritage, having those conversations with them about their experiences, their lifestyle at home, their identity, their history, and anything else that they wish to share with you. Use these opportunities to learn from each other and to better understand each other. Lastly, this year we decided to change the title of this event from Hispanic Heritage Month to Latinx Heritage Month. This is not a new term, but it is one that is being used and heard a lot more. As I reflected on changing the name, because reality is that not everyone uses the term Latinx, I thought it was important to use this term because it is more inclusive of all Latinx people. To me, Latinx represents new immigrants, first and second generation Latinx Americans that are still trying to find their identity and their place in the United States. Latinx also includes all, regardless of nationality, race, sexual orientation, religion, or disability. As the community continues to grow and change, so do the people. Although it's not incorrect to say Hispanic or Hispanic Heritage Month, many believe, including myself, the term Latinx is more inclusive to the overall population of Latinos in the United States. With that being said, we have a great program for you today, and I hope you enjoy it. There will be some time at the end for questions and answers, so I hope that you can stick around for the full time. And up next, we have a true leader among us, one who will be crossing the stage and graduating from USI in the spring of 2021. Please help me welcome Cassie Santos. All right.
Hi, everyone. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
I can.
Hi, just wanted to double check because I'm having issues, but I've been honored today to come up here and speak about what Hispanic Heritage Month means to me, but in particularly what does being Latina mean to me. So I wrote this poem and it comes from heart. So please feel free to follow me, and if you relate, this is a time to reflect back on you as in your identity. So Hispanic Heritage Month is a time of celebration, but in reality, it's a time of education. We educate our communities on why the culture is significant. We paint them our efforts and say we are magnificent. Porque siendo Latinx is more than just bright colors and delicious food. It has a deeper meaning beyond more than how we are viewed. Porque la cultura no es algo de solo un mes, es algo más grande de lo que tú ves. La cultura does not consist of rapists and murderers and drug dealers. It consists of doctors, teachers, lawyers, and engineers. La cultura traces back to different parts of the globe. We carry our story our stories as seen through the wardrobe. La cultura consists of people who are discriminated on the daily. We are blamed for so much, yet we are the help mainly. La cultura consists of beautiful people. Don't listen to the media. They say we are evil. My skin may be white in the winter and kissed in the summer. That's because Latinos come in all different colors. Latinos don't have a definite shape or size. The media says we do, but I call it all lies. We speak Spanish.
Cassie, I believe you were muted for some. All right, we can hear you again, I think.
Being Latino means you come from people who have suffered. We've been lied to always, which is why we are flustered. But this is why I continue to learn about my heritage. Learning helps me support my friends and family, and that's imperative. Which is why I continue to learn, because it's unique to me. Porque siendo Chicana is more than you see. During this time, I reflect on my identity, asking myself the woman I want to be. I used to wake up every day asking myself, do I get to be paisa or do I get to be gringa? But hoy I wake up knowing I'm Chicana y eso viene con una vida linda. It's knowing I come from two different worlds that come in one. Regardless of the rejection, I know I'm not done. Porque being Chicana means que no soy de aquí, pero tampoco de allá. Both countries remind me of the struggle, eso nunca falla. My roots are from Guanajuato y Michoacán. Fui nacida aquí, pero no me olvido de allá. I stand in this country because of an American dream, remembering on a daily that it's not what it seems. My parents thought they would see a white picket fence, only to end up in a struggle if it doesn't make sense. They painted a picture with rainbows and wealth. They were promised a good life with incredible health. Pero es toda una mentira porque la lucha sigue. Mis padres en pobreza sufriendo, que alguien me lo explique. Porque siendo Chicana means advocating for my parents. Vienen todo con precio y todo por falta de papeles. Porque siendo Chicana means pulling an entire family to give them a future. Y aunque me mate el esfuerzo, ellos sirven como mi suture. Porque siendo Chicana means rebelling against my traditions, doing anything and everything regardless of my conditions. Porque siendo Chicana means using my voice, using it daily to give people a choice. Porque siendo Chicana means speaking for the silent, knowing I annoy racists because I won't stay quiet. Porque siendo Chicana means I challenge the impossible. It's a mandated thing, not just something that's optional. Porque siendo Chicana means I continue to hustle, so my immigrant parents have less of a struggle. Porque siendo Chicana means learning how to question the status quo, porque a mí no me cuadro cuando me dicen que no. Porque siendo Chicana means I challenge mis ancestros, porque dicen que no puedo, porque son mis meros testers. Porque siendo Chicana means I do more than the stereotype. It's why I'm positive and I continue to self-hype. Porque siendo Chicana significa que I have rules to break, recordándome que gano más than what's at stake. Porque siendo Chicana means representing emerging national histories. Aunque exista la frontera, I stay writing my history. Porque siendo Chicana means I can listen to Los Huracanes del Norte on cleaning days. And when I study, I will listen to Russ or Drake, and I don't care what people have to say. Porque siendo Chicana means I can enjoy sopes, tamales, y tacos, but I stay drinking my frappes, you know how that goes. Porque siendo Chicana means I will see half of this country being Hispanic in 2050, but you didn't think about that, huh? It's quite nifty. Porque siendo Chicana is more than just these words. It's a lifestyle too. Let's put that in the records. Porque siendo Chicana means I celebrate today and tomorrow. It's something I pray one day my kids learn to follow. Hoy y mañana es para toda mi comunidad latina. Embrace yourself porque tienen sangre fina. My name is Cassandra, not Cassandra. Soy Chicana, not Chicana. Soy orgullosamente producto de inmigrantes y lo seré hasta el día de mi muerte. Lo que cuento hoy es solo algo superficial porque siendo latino va hasta el más allá. Thank you.
Wow. Let's give her a round of a virtual applause. That was amazing. Thank you so much, Cassie. All right. That was beautiful. That was inspiring. Great job. Thank you so much. Next up, we have another great leader. It is Jessica Carapia Cortez, who will be introducing our speaker for today.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jessica Carapia Cortez, and I'm a junior majoring in social work. I first want to say, Cassie, that was a really beautiful poem. The Multicultural Center prides itself in hosting motivational and impactful speakers. Although this is the first year hosting a virtual speaker, I can promise all of you that it will not be any different than if it were in person. We have a very special treat for you all today. This speaker has written, directed, and edited acclaimed political and social documentaries for over 2 decades. As a Cuban immigrant, leaving at the age of 14, she has fought and worked hard for every accomplishment she has achieved. She is known for her presidential biographies for American experience, including Ulysses S. Grant, Jimmy Carter, Reagan, and Ike, as well as her work on the Rockefellers and Churchills. Her other credits include series editor for Americas and Mexico, associate editor for Frontline Special Report, Crisis in Central America. She is the recipient of numerous awards, including a Primetime Emmy Award, the Christopher Award, Eric Barno Award, and Peabody Awards for Reagan and Ike. Additionally, she also holds a PhD in International Affairs from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. It is my pleasure to introduce to you all this year's Latinx Heritage Month speaker, Dr. Adriana Bosch.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I wanted to say that I'm just really thrilled to be here and to see so many people come to discuss, really, to talk about what it means to be us and what it means to be individually us and what it means to maybe be collectively us. I want to add to my what my biography, probably my proudest 2 series. One was Latin Music USA, which was a series about Latino culture and music. And the other one, of course, was a 6-hour series on Latino Americans, and that dealt with our experience in the United States. So delighted to be here, and I mean that from the heart. Thank you for having me. I'm honored, and I hope that we can keep this conversation and that we can learn from each other. I already learned a lot from Cassie's poem, and I just want to continue sharing with you. Sometimes I feel like you have more to give than I do, because ultimately your stories are so vibrant and so, in the day, when we look at from the outside, it's not the same as that beating heart that you bring to this, each and every one of you in your personal daily struggles to make something of yourself in a society that may or may not be receptive at different times. But it's an honor to be here, quite frankly.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bosch. And please, once again, thank you so much for being. It truly is an honor. I was very excited whenever I got to virtually meet you, and I've watched your documentary of Latino Americans. It was one of those that when I first found out, I came across it not by I guess sort of by accident, but I was really as a first generation Latino, I was actually looking for either books or movies or documentaries that reflected my identity and my culture. And I was having a hard time finding something until I came across Latino Americans, and I quickly bought it. Once I got it, I opened it up, I watched it, and I spent the next 2 days watching the full 6 hours. I was so engaged in it because I could feel like for the first time I could actually learn about this history of Latinos in the United States, because it's not history that we get to hear sometimes in our school system. So very excited for you to be here. And I guess let me just start with that, with leading that to the first question, and that is, what was your thought process? Why the reasoning for Latino Americans?
Well, frankly, it came to me. I was just finishing Latin Music USA, which really was an effort to find the commonalities in Latinos. That's, I think, something that is ongoing. We try to find our commonalities versus our individual national identities as members of this larger community, which I think is always in process and information in the United States. That third alternative, that third identity that we all share, and we don't really, you know, it's always it's a very fluid one, and it's being constructed each and every day. So I've been working on Latin Music USA, and Jeff Beaver of WIDA approached me and asked me to lead a series on Latinos overall, something that dealt with the struggles of Latino, but also took an approach to the Latino experience as intimately linked to American history. So our objective was never to talk about the Latino experience as something that was external to American history, but very much integrated and part of it. And I felt that, you know, I was just blown away and honored, and felt a great deal of responsibility to try to do this. And immediately what I did is I knew that I needed to surround myself. Let me just say this. I understood the diversity of our experience. I understood that how do you possibly combine in a single series experience of Mexican Americans, the experience of Cubans, the experience of people who lived in the 19th century, you know, and people who lived in the United States in the 19th century and 17th and 18th, and people who arrived only, you know, a decade before. What were the commonalities? What did these people have in common? How could you make a whole out of this entire experience? And that was really what motivated me more than anything else to try to do this. And as you know, and as a Cuban American, I felt my job was to learn and to seek and to try to break out of my own experiences as, you know, as it's insular, and you know, I mean that in both ways, as they were, and try to kind of embrace the totality of Latino history. And that really was the central theme and the central effort that we try to do. I engage producers from the diversity of the Latino community. I engage Mexican American producers, two, an older one and a younger one, very different perspectives. So I engaged the Salvadoran producer. There were, you know, Dominicans in the film, in the series. There was just about anyone we could get that was willing to spend a year and a half or 2 years struggling with these issues and coming up with 6 hours of television that could really last the time, that had a long shelf life, because we understood, or I understood, the importance of what we were doing. And so we embarked on this. It was an adventure. We didn't know what stories we were going to tell. We knew that we wanted to tell personal stories. We knew that we didn't want to have some sort of a, you know, dissipated narrative that dealt with facts and data and all that. But we wanted to tell the stories from the characters up, from the personal experiences out, and then try to unite those personal experiences, I think, more than anything else, by how they interacted with the American narrative. So in a sense, I'm reliving all this because none of this was handed down. All of this was pretty much crafted and by us in meetings and by thinking through everything. And so we knew a few things by then. We knew, number one, that, you know, when we started the series, if you take a point of departure, let's say 1970, the year that I came to the United States. I spent 2 years in Europe before, left Cuba in 68. There were 10 million Latinos at that point. So their story, that was a turning point. From that point on, you know, there's 61 million Latinos now. So, you know, the explosion of Latinos has been tremendous and tremendously transformative. But we also knew that the experience of those Latinos, the container in which those Latinos lived their lives and were going to continue to live their lives, had been set up by those first 70, more than that, 2 centuries, let's say, before that. And so we engaged history. We thought, let's engage history and let's see how we view the larger American historical setting. So we went to the beginning. We said, like, okay, let's just say melting pot is gone. We know that the melting pot is gone, though I have my doubts about that. I think there is a new version of the melting pot going on. And we said, okay, do we want to talk about this idea of a salad, that we're all like have our own identities and we just sort of coexist in this bowl that, where we don't really interact, we're just there together? No. So we came up with the notion of American history as a tapestry, and the Latinos' experience being a series of threads that were embedded, that were already woven into this tapestry. The fact, and we took a hint from historians and said, okay, we understand that there is no such thing as immigrant history, that American history is the history of immigrants. Therefore, we're interwoven into this history. We're not external to it. So we need to tell our story within the boundaries, in a sense, of this tapestry. As we started following the threads of that tapestry, what we encountered, what fascinated me the most, was the fact that we had been always living with the notion that in order to be Americans, we have to buy into the narrative and the myths of the foundation of the United States, the foundational mythologies, the foundational narrative of this nation. And as Latinos, we said, no, wait a second. This is not what we're going to do. I mean, if you really look at history, Spaniards were here way ahead of the British. There was, St. Augustine was founded in 1598, Jamestown, 1760. Juan de Oñate, that unfortunate man, founded, San Juan de los Caballeros above Santa Fe, way before any of this happened. And then we and the missionaries who came up through California and founded that wonderful set of missions that really created another foundational, if you may, narrative or mythology of America, which is called, and the Archbishop of Los Angeles has a wonderful sermon about this, the mythology, the foundational myth of El Camino Real. So we thought, we need to explore this, and we need to the first thing we needed to blow apart was the notion that this nation we needed to look to Plymouth Rock and that we needed to look to Jamestown in order to be American. We said, no, that's not what we're doing. We're going to look at these other narratives. We are going to look at these other foundational myths in all, of their positive and their negative. Because, if you look at Plymouth Rock and if you look at Jamestown, those are a lot of negative aspects to it. So do our own mythological, our own foundational myths. The indigenous, the native people were terribly abused by the Spaniards. Well, we have to own that as part of who we are and as part of how we establish our own identity and our own culture in the United States. So that's the first thing we did. We laid a basis of this other America that did not have to look there to be. That we had our own legitimacy, we had established our own nation, and that in a sense, that nation was a thriving nation until the manifest destiny came and overwhelmed everything. And then suddenly, in order to be Americans, we now have to look to them and find our answers with them and not within us and not within our history, not within our narratives, not within the wonderful documents that are harbored at, the library, the Bancroft Library in Berkeley, where all of these firsthand stories are being maintained. And from then on, we kept going. Now, if there was an Italian American immigration and a Polish immigration, and and all of those, and an Irish immigration at the turn of the century, my God, there was a Mexican migration that was a massive 1 million people crossed the border, into Texas and Los Angeles in the 1920s, by 1920, in the early part of the 20th century. And that particular immigration was as fundamental in building the United States as any of those other immigrants were in building the United States. They built Texas, they built Los Angeles. Now we're gonna tell you that story. And so if African Americans had a wonderful civil rights experience, so did we. I mean, look at, Cesar Chavez, look at Dolores Huerta, look at the walkouts in LA, look at the Chicano movement, look at all of that. And so we have our own, in this larger American history, we don't need to assume other people's myths and narratives in order to be America. We have our own Americanness. We have our own history that we can learn, that we can embrace, and which really, I think for me, sets a commonality of being, and I agree with you, I hate, Hispanic, we can discuss that later, where it comes from and why, it's so controversial and all that. But this Latino or Latinx identity, as it's increasingly being recognized in our world of diversity, has its own place, and it is American. You don't become an American by becoming other. You are American because you are from the beginning. And so this notion of assuming an American identity is false. And that's how we approach this series. We were gonna tell our history as Americans in our terms, through our narratives and through our mythologies, our foundational mythologies, in all their beauty and all their ugliness. And so we set out to do that. And that's what we did. It took us a couple of years. I think in the end, we did accomplish at least to tell, through that series, I think in that 6 hours, if we did anything, we established our legitimate presence as Americans in the United States without having to become other. So that's the short answer to your question. I'm sorry. I mean, this is something that took, we always felt it was a phenomenal thing that we were trying to do. And, there were some things that came out better, some things that came out worse, but the intent was that. The intent was not to be separatist, but the intent was to say, yes, you are an American. I'm sorry, you don't become an American. And I remember in this sort of trajectory and in this concept, when we presented the series in Los Angeles at a television station in LA, and I was talking to Rita Moreno, and we had a big conversation, and there were lots of people and all. But what I remember distinctly was a Mexican woman, a Mexican immigrant, working class woman, coming up to me with a 6-year-old girl, and she was holding her hand. And she came up to me and she said, I want to thank you. And I went like, oh, well, thank you very much for being here. She said, no, I really want to thank you. I came to this country with my daughter, and I left Mexico behind. And although that's always going to be her culture and her background, I now know that she has a history where she lives that belongs to her and that she belongs to. And that blew me away. That really made everything and all the effort and all the work that we have done worthwhile. To have a mother tell you that you have kind of created something that her daughter can use to grow up in a legitimate and proud way in her new country. Because, you know, we do leave our countries. It's not that we break up with them. We don't. We are sort of, I think, the first immigration, large immigration in the United States, and the first group that actually we haven't broken with our country. So we're constantly refreshed by cultural references, by new immigrants, by going home, by our parents coming, all of those transnational, you know, connections refresh our Latinidad. But that's gone in a way. It's there, but we are here. And here, we don't have to have come on the Mayflower to be American, you know, because our ancestors came here too. And many of them were already here, even when those ancestors came. Because, you know, we owe a lot of, not I, because I'm an immigrant, but a lot of Native Americans, Latinos that call themselves Latinos, have Native roots in American soil. You just go to New Mexico, you know, go to certain places in Los Angeles, and you see it, you feel it, it's there. And, you know, San Antonio, all of Texas. And so it's a wonderful, it was wonderful. You know, that's what, you know, that's the greatest, I think it's, quite frankly, I would say that is the highlight of my professional life, and I've been making film for over 30 years.
No, I think, so for those who have not seen Latino Americans, one, they need to watch it. But second of all,
I think everyone is.
But I think, you know, as you said, it's 6 hours in it's a sequence, but you tell the story of how Latinos have evolved and impacted this nation over the years, whether it be music, whether it be identity, whether, you know, it's so many different things. But, you know, you reference identity quite a bit in history specifically. So my next question I have for you is, you know, as I look at this this current generation, I feel like sometimes there are many who have lost their history, which in a sense have lost their identity. So can you speak on that? I mean, like, how do you see the next generation? How can we learn more about our history, exactly like you were saying, and not leave it behind, but make it and continue it so that we can continue to build this country?
Well, let me tell you that it's not as bad as I thought. I went and looked at the numbers. And essentially, there is, as you know, 61 million Latinos in the United States now. And that's for second generation. I mean, so does the census said in 2019. Out of that 61 million, 14%, okay, 14% of Latinos identify themselves as American. 39% they identify themselves as Hispanic or Latinos, and 47%, right, identify themselves as being from their country of origin. The closer you get to the more recent generations, to the more recent immigrants, those numbers shift. Essentially, you have, you know, 56% to identify with their country of origin, and only let me make sure I don't give you the wrong numbers here, and something like 12% identify. No, hold on. Where are those most immigrants? 40% of immigrants from Latin America and the Caribbean. 39%. But so the shift has been from maybe 12% to 22% who identify themselves as American versus identifying themselves as Latinos, or, you know, the hyphen, the same as hyphen, from their country of origin. I'm Mexican American in the case of many Chicanos, I'm Nicaraguan, or I'm Cuban American, whatever it is that you. But right now, it's pretty much a third, and a third. It's sort of divided in thirds. That's kind of a little scary, but it's not terrible. And I'll tell you what's not terrible. First of all, it hasn't changed that, you know, as much as you would expect. And second of all, what does it mean to be an American? I think what it means to be an American today is a very different thing than what it meant to be an American, say, in 1970, in 68, when a lot of people began to come to the United States, because America itself has changed. And what it means to be an American, I think, is, in a sense, a large portion of that is your own culture that is now become an American, a blended into, you know, what this some people, and I tell you, this author, Guy Garcia, he wrote a very, very interesting book about 10 years ago called The New Mainstream. And essentially this new mainstream, which is what we refer to now as American culture, includes a lot of things that are Latino. Includes Shakira, it includes Marc Anthony, it includes Gloria Estefan, it includes, you know, God knows, you know, Bad Bunny and Cardi B. I mean, how American can you get? That's American. And so in a sense, you embrace your by becoming an American, you're no longer necessarily having to leave yourself and your identity behind. You are embracing a culture that has you in it. And I think that's been the tremendous and wonderful phenomenon of the past 20, 30 years. The fact that so much of ourselves is now indistinguishable from what it means to be American. And I think we need to celebrate that too. I mean, I think we need to celebrate, I don't know, I'm being foolish here, Apolinaria Lorenzana, and we need to celebrate, you know, Emiliano Zapata, and we need to celebrate whomever else we celebrate. But we also need to celebrate who we are now, because all of it has become us. And and so that is a very encouraging thing in terms of history and in terms of identity. I can speak out of personal experience. In I would say 1990, just to give you a date, but something like that, I encountered a book by a great American historian named Leonard Pitt. The book was called The Decline of the Californias, and it had been published in 1974. And it was a book that basically told the story of Alta California, that, you know, and Alta California became Alta California. It was Alta California, but the culture of the Californios was born when the missions were secularized. And all these people got these land grants, and, you know, unfortunately, they also, the Indians came with the land grants. The Indians in their missions, when they got the land of the missions, the Indians, you know, stayed, and they were sort of liberated, but where could they go? And so this entire culture was formed and existed in California. As I read that took me back to the missions. That took me to a lot of other places. But as I read that book, I became so enamored and so connected, is the right word, so connected to that history and to the rest of the history. That was my entryway, in a sense, into what I call Latino history in the United States. That connected me to Mexican Americans. That connected me to people who lived in New Mexico. That connected me to a lot of other people, because I understood that those narratives of dispossession, those narratives of discrimination, those narratives of success, those narratives of blowing expectations that people have of you, that narrative of fighting prejudice, fighting brownness, and while you know, while being very proud to be brown, but fighting the notion that your brownness disqualifies you, fighting racism as a Latino. All of those things belong to all of us. And to me, learning that history was the pathway to embrace the notion that yes, we do have a certain commonality, and that yes, this we have an experience in this nation that really means that we share a lot more than what divides us. And so I really encourage anyone I meet to look into those histories, to take a look at the Pueblo Indians, to take a look at the revolt against Juan de Oñate when he got thrown out of New Mexico, to take a look at, the Camino Real narrative, to take a look at, how New Orleans, at Juan Seguin, at the narrative of Texas, to look at LA in 1920. If you go to Los Angeles, don't just go to Hollywood, go to La Plaza. Go look at Pio Pico's house, which is now a hotel. Go look at Siqueiros' mural at the beer garden. I mean, there's a lot of touristy stuff, but go look at the place of our, and I say ours because, and maybe, that's not correct, but I embraced it in such a way that I could not distinguish my own experience from theirs. And all of a sudden, I went to that placita, and I went to Los Angeles, and I saw all that stuff. And I went to Vallejo's house in Sonoma, and I basically went like, oh my God, this is mine. This too is mine. And it made me, being a Cuban and being ripped apart from my own land, it gave me a sense of belonging that I never experienced before in the United States. I felt at home. And I think that once you learn history in that way, and once you learn the stories of all these people, you begin to feel that, you have a people that you belong to in this country, and that you don't have to, you can love, Guanajuato, and you can, love, and, Oaxaca, and you can love Mexico City and all that, but you have another place that you can love that's much closer to you, and you should learn about it, and you should really, you should really, embrace it intimately, because it may, in my personal experience, I really was made me feel truly at home in the United States.
Definitely. No, I agree. And right, I'm having trouble too far outside of Evansville, Indiana. I have gone to Miami, and honestly, I mean, I can't.
Oh, well, there you go. This place is nuts.
I can't really. I've never been to Los Angeles, but I would love to go. Just for
Los Angeles is magnificent. You have to. Los Angeles is. I mean, I find Miami is my hometown now, but I find Miami is the Cuban enclave, and Miami outgrew the Cuban enclave. There is, by the way, a Miami culture, and second, third, fourth generation Cubans. We're now, we came in 1959, our first. So, it's been quite a while now. We're here now, 59, 30, that's 60, 70 years. There's like generations now. But there is something, even when the kids are incredibly Americanized, they're not Americanized like Bostonians. They're not Americanized like, New Yorkers. In fact, when kids go out of Miami to these Northeastern schools, they're fish out of water. You can see them. They go out there. I laugh. Sometimes I've gone to speak to these students in these universities in the Northeast, and they're all cold, and they don't know exactly what to do, how to behave. And they've grown into Miamians, just like so many Chicanos, Mexican Americans have grown into Angelenos and Texans. And so what I'm trying to say is that there is nothing to fear in becoming American, because becoming American is becoming yourself too. because America is you in all of its glory and all of its flaws that we see every day so loudly, but it is also you. And so, you know, with my hair out of place, because I just got a little, I knew I was gonna be emotional about this, because to me, that series was a transforming an emotional experience. And so that's what comes out. I mean, I have tons of data and things and, you know, that I could recite, but that's not what's important about all this. I think the process of identity is a deeply emotional process, and it is a transformative process. And it really means inevitably, that you will distance yourself from where your parents or your grandparents came from if you came as an immigrant, and you will get closer to the place where you are. Where that place where you are, my friends, is no longer foreign. This land is your land. All you have to do is know it and claim it. And if you can invest yourself in the legitimacy of everyone that came before you, do, because it's your home. Anyway, see, my dog agrees.
Yes, I was gonna say. No, you know, I kind of want to not necessarily shift gears a little bit, but I know you're fine. You were, you know, you mentioned a lot about the just knowing all those who have came before and the challenges that they have overcome. For you as a Cuban immigrant, right? Somebody who has done very well in your career of filmmaking.
Thank you.
What challenges, what obstacles did you face as maybe
Oh
as
my God, what did
Latina
I?
or an immigrant? You know, would you mind sharing that with us?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I, you know, you learn from experience in these cases. I think nothing prepares you for the experience of being a first generation immigrant in the United States, especially if you come within a certain age group where you still have, you know, you still have the possibility of making a life for yourself as an American, whatever that may mean for you. And so I didn't want to be Cuban. And the reason I didn't want to be Cuban is not because I didn't love Cuba, because I didn't love Cuban food, because I didn't love Cuban music. No, I loved all that, but I hated Cuban culture. I had come from Cuba. I lived in Cuba until 1968. So I was accustomed to a different Cuba than the Cuba. And then I spent 2 years in Spain. And then, I'm sorry. Hey, you have to be quiet. I'm sorry, my mom's caretaker left tonight. I'm alone with the dog and my mother, and he gets nervous. So I went to Elizabeth, New Jersey. And when I went to Elizabeth, New Jersey, I just couldn't believe this had happened to me. It was like, what hell have I been dropped right into? Because it was like completely Cuba 1959. And I'd already transcended all that. So I didn't want to go to dances with chaperones. I didn't want to, do all the things that these, I hate baptisms and quinceañeras. Sorry. And I didn't want to go to baptisms. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be cool. I wanted to listen to rock and roll. I wanted to listen to jazz. I wanted to, to listen to the blues. I wanted to, to be part of the culture of the 60s and the 70s, all that wonderful, white African American. I mean, I wanted to be that. And so I, pretty much became Jewish. I mean, that's the truth. I became friends with a group of high school kids, and they were American. In fact, they were pretty much Jewish, which I think is a common entry point. There's a lot of people that there is an openness to Jews that I found very easy to kind of like go in there. Then of course that took, it took no time for me to, the minute I got to college after a couple of years of high school, I began to re-Cubanize very, very easily, very quickly. I got together with a group of Cubans who then were, looking at the Cuban Revolution with different eyes. I mean, it was not like, a total wholesale rejection of everything, but they were, essentially seeing the Cuban Revolution from a more diverse viewpoint. There were some bad things, there were some good things. Let's look at it again, blah, blah. And in that way, I began to yearn for, for Cuba. And I began to read more Cuban literature. I began to listen to, like all of us, to, Pablo Milanés and Silvio Rodriguez and all that stuff. So that's how it was. I personally, in those first years, did not experience what I would consider outright discrimination. I'm pretty much white, or at least that's, what people see. And so I was not discriminated on the basis of that. Then slowly you learn that you have an accent, and that because you have an accent, your ideas and your thoughts and what who you are is not taken as seriously as if you didn't have an accent. Then anything that you do, you're always, when you go into a different culture, you're always a little too loud. You laugh a little too hard. You're always a little too effusive. You're always a little too loud. And that sort of becomes clear. You wonder, why are people reacting to me in a slightly different way? And then you realize that's because I'm different. And those differences become apparent and more apparent as time goes on. For me, once I became, once I graduated high school and college, and I went to the Fletcher School, which was sort of, a Harvard tough school, a very elite school, then you realize how different you are and how different your experience was from the kids that were around you, and how their privilege made your career and your work all the more difficult, because you didn't have the experiences they had. You didn't have, the breadth of knowledge they had. You did not have the command of the language that they had. You didn't go to the schools that they went to. And so you confronted all that from a position of weakness. And you have to work very, very hard to keep up and to succeed. I think my entire generation that had opportunities to go to those kinds of schools, I think we all share that experience of finding out how unprepared ultimately we were for the challenges and for the opportunities that were available to us, because you were you were going into a world that had been built on privilege, and you went in there as an underprivileged person. And that was my experience. See, and when I started making documentaries, the same thing. When I started writing documentaries, it was like you needed to just write short sentences, and that was really tough. And if you were 5 minutes late, immediately everybody rolled their eyes and said Cuban time. And in those minute but very cutting and hurtful ways, you saw the otherness in you. Now, I have to thank my colleagues, especially at WGBH and in public television, for being very, very welcoming and very open. I think, I've had opportunities few people had, and I was doing programming about American history, being a Latino. So in that way, I was never excluded from being an observant and a participant in the history of this nation, whether it was, presidents or whether, families, biographies, whatever stories I was telling, they were not stories that I was not ghettoized in that way. So that really was my experience. I just, I just think you have to work harder, and you can't assume that other people are quiet. You have to understand that there is an otherness always, especially for someone like that. I think second, third generation, that probably goes down. But there is a certain otherness. That's why we tend to hang out together so much. Because there's some differences that can, that are not so easily erased. I think the new generation is doing a fantastic job at erasing some of those differences. My generation, there was still a rub. There was still a rub. I still feel it. As I said, I'm always a little too effusive, a little too loud, a little too humorous, and a little too emotional. Okay? Quiet.
Maybe this is the Latino in us.
Oh yeah, I'm not as loud as the Cubans, and I'm certainly not as loud as my dog. But so let me be serious for 1 second here, and I wanna talk about what does it mean to be Hispanic, or what does it mean to be Latino? And I agree with you that Hispanic, first of all, was a made-up name. Hispanic was an umbrella category that was invented by Madison Avenue. The minute there were too many Puerto Ricans and too many Cubans, and they needed to market to somebody other than Mexican Americans. They say, okay, let's call them all Hispanic, so they can all buy Goya. And they can all, we can sell the music, we can, create these cross-references and create a bigger market. And we're going to call these people Hispanic. And thus was born the Hispanic market. Then in 1973, it became a census category under Richard Nixon. But what unites us ultimately is language. I think whether you speak a little or you speak a lot, most of us who consider ourselves Latinos or Hispanic, and I understand they're not to be used interchangeably, speak some Spanish. We generally have a parent or both parents, more than the majority of us have both parents are Latinos or Mexicans or Hispanics or whatever of Spanish origin. And we tend to participate in activities with other Hispanics. So we surround ourselves, with people like us. And, there's also participation in historical celebrations that have to do with this notion of being Hispanic or Latino. Now, why shed Hispanic? For a very simple reason. Not everyone wants to be a descendant from Spain, and not everyone welcomes the fact that the Spanish subjugated the natives. And, in Mexico, in the United States, everywhere. So we don't want to be linked up to this notion of Hispanic. So Latino became a substitute, a politically palatable substitute, replacement for Hispanic for a lot of people. And it meant something else, but it meant the same thing. It meant the acceptance of a commonality of people from diverse nations in Latin America that chose the United States as their place of residence, who immigrated to the United States, and the children of those people. And and this sort of umbrella identity that that something like 33% of us identify, but I think we all sort of know is there. And so that's what that's where the whole notion of Hispanic comes from. I think that if you in the 70s you boycott grapes and you knew that the Farm Workers Union was led by Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, and you made common cause with those people, you became a Latino in some spiritual way. But I do think that it's not just a cultural choice. I also think it's an intellectual choice, and I think it is a profound spiritual choice.
No, I agree. I think it's important to, well, first, to just know the difference of the two. But, you hit on something that I thought was very interesting, and you can see that in Latino Music USA or Latin Music USA and you can see it also towards the end of Latino Americans when we talked about the market of Hispanics in the music, in the the impact that Latin music has had in the United States. At one point it was cool, and then it changed for a while, right, because of immigration. But then it seems like to me right now, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like it's starting to come back. You're starting to see or hear more of Bad Bunny.
It's very much back. Yeah.
So
it's very much back. I think that, I think Latinos, reggaeton was the way, was the road back. Reggaeton was our embrace of hip hop with our own beat, which, by the way, is a Jamaican beat that settled in Panama, and then became and then went on to Puerto Rico, and then came to the United States. That's the trajectory of reggaeton. But it became our own, I wouldn't say answer, because I think it's not an opposition to, but it became our interpretation. And this is how we embrace hip hop. Not that we didn't embrace it in any other way. I was listening to Dre, and I was listening to NWA and all that, and I was loving it because I have a lot. My culture has such a huge Afro-Caribbean, African content to it, that anything that has that beat and has that language and has that theme becomes very appealing to me. But I think reggaeton was our way back, and then you started seeing great stars, come out, and it's no coincidence that a lot of these big reggaetoneros and a lot of the pop singers were from Puerto Rico. They spoke English, they could promote in English, and they understood the United States because they are American in that fundamental way. And so it's not a coincidence that the music became the transformation of a lot of what became popular, and I'm not discounting group and banda and all of the of the Mexican and Mexican American contributions to popular music. But in terms of that explosion of music, it really was hip hop was the entry point. Hip hop, rap. We got reggaeton. I mean, the first real reggaetonero was the Panamanian guy. I forget his name now, and he was black.
El General.
I mean, El General. That was the first. That was it. That was our MC Hammer, man. And then now you have Cardi B. I mean, Cardi B is who is Cardi B? Cardi B is a Puerto Rican. Well, it's a Dominican. I think she's Dominican, and she's a real Latina. She's got all kinds of mixes from the Bronx. Boy, it doesn't get more American than that. And she is. I thought the beauty of what she did was celebrate that her come out song. Oye, como I forget now. I'm sorry. I'm fading on you a little bit, but was to take a classic and celebrate it and rise above it.
I like it like that.
I like it like that, which is which is not salsa, which is it's a boogaloo. It's a piece of boogaloo, the predecessor of salsa in New York. And so, that in of itself has great, that's a great, whatever. Anyway, I think I beat that, I think that went long, but yeah, I think salsa, well, if you discount boogaloo, because boogaloo was so specific, if salsa was truly the first Latino sound in the United States, that wasn't imported, in a sense. That didn't come from Sinaloa, that didn't come from Mexico City, that didn't come from Cuba, it came from, it came from Puerto Rico, it came from Cuba, and it came from deeply from New York. And it tapped into an identity that was uniquely New York. And it created a movement that then went back out and took over for so long Latin America. But it was a Latino, if you may want to call it that, creation, something that happened in the United States from American roots, from immigrants' roots, and then went out into the Latino world. No one could ever, there was all this stuff that salsa is Cuban music. Well, it is, but it isn't. It's New York music. And, I'm going to shoot him. Remington, you be quiet. Quiet. I'm so sorry. Anyway.
You're fine.
Okay. Next.
No, that's right. The reason why I asked that question is just because, when I talk to our college students, one way or another, it always goes back to music. And I think, every year we have, every year during Latinx Heritage Month, we always have a series of dance classes where we show how to dance salsa, merengue, bachata, and
right.
Latino students and non-Latino students come and enjoy it and learn. And music is such a powerful way to unite people. And and I think Latin music has had such a big impact in what American culture is today. So that's why I asked that question.
Well, an American cinema. I mean, Mexican in the 1920s, so many silent stars were Mexican, and a lot of the faces that we saw, and a lot of the beauty standards that were established, Dolores del Rio, for example. I mean, Rita Hayworth. A lot of those beauty standards of, the big eyes and the bone structure and all of those sort of semi-exotic, they were Mexican. And that disappeared when the talkies came, because now these women and these men had accents, and they were not going to appeal to the larger American populations. But Mexican Americans have had a huge impact on American cinema and on American culture in different ways. And so culture has been definitely a spearhead for us to make inroads in the United States. Food, yeah, but everybody's done food. Ultimately, I think I started. When I first got into this game of Latinos and, and identity and differences and hyphens and, and all that stuff, you forget that in the end, we're not that different from anyone else. I think that our skin color, I think that some other, I think that our identification with a culture that has been so belittled in the United States as native culture. I think that our Africanness in the other way, we have racial references that make Americans uncomfortable. We trigger racism. We trigger dormant notions of racism that are not necessarily displayed in us, but we trigger them in the memory of. So we do experience that. I'm not going to deny that. But we're not that different from some of the other immigrant groups. When you think that Italian Americans blended into the melting pot, well, you haven't been to East Boston. You haven't been to the North End. I mean, there's so much Italian that's still there. So this notion of melting into America was never really true. I think that people didn't quite melt into that pot. I thought a lot of people's identities were just subsumed into many other things. And I think we are not that different in the end, and we're not going to be that different in the end. We're lucky that we live in a culture where identity is celebrated. And I dare say that it was through us and through our own civil rights movement, through our own cultural diversity movement, through Chicanos, you know, through Latin music, through salsa, through the Young Lords, through, you know, all of that stuff, and through African Americans, that many of these other cultures went and grabbed their own self-identity, their own identity back. All of a sudden, you display your Italian-ness, and you were not, you know, you became an Italian American, and it became clear. We put a light on that. And I think we as Latinos do have, and I think African Americans share that as well. We did shine a light on diversity, and we shined a light on the legitimacy of diversity, and on this notion, and we said like, no, this melting pot, you don't need to be so American to succeed. You can keep yourself. You can eat pizza till the cows come home, and that makes you American. That doesn't make you less American. That, you know, I mean, you are Italian. You don't have to give up who you are in order to be an American, in order to be successful. I think this is something we contributed to the American conversation. And I think in a way it's ultimately we become, you know, some of us become that. And that's why when I first started talking about why I don't fear becoming an American, it's because being an American is being us as well. You know, I mean, I think we have succeeded. I mean, within all the racism we're seeing, that, you know, with all of that incredible rhetoric, hurtful, horrible, of Donald Trump at the beginning of his during the campaign and at the beginning of his presidency, that was thrown at us because we were the weakest. I mean, I used to say, and I know that I'm all going off the rails here, but what the heck? You know, I used to tell people, he's picking on us because he can't pick on African Americans because they're too tough. So he's picking on the most vulnerable of us. He is teaching people hatred by teaching them to hate the people that cannot defend themselves as well. And so it was like kindergarten hatred. I mean, hate those people that are coming across the border. They're criminals, they're murderers, they're rapists, because they're weak and vulnerable, and they, you know, and afraid that if they raise their voices, they wouldn't find a place in America. Leave that aside, if you may. I think that the world has, and the United States has changed tremendously in our favor. And I don't think we need to hide. And I think, you know, it doesn't make us less American, doesn't make us less of anything. You know, I mean, why? I dance salsa. Salsa came from New York. What makes me a New Yorker? Maybe. Makes me a Puerto Rican? Maybe. Makes me a Cuban? Maybe. But it makes me an American because salsa is American. and on and on. I mean, you can you can take many examples like that.
Definitely.
Many examples like that.
No,
Anyway, that's
no, it's right. No, that's great. Thank you. No, and you're right. I think we have to be proud of who we are, where we come from, and it's okay to bring our identity with us. But I definitely want to give an opportunity for those. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I think you have an idea.
yeah. No, I think pride is an interesting thing. I don't think we have a choice. And I think it's like, if you're not proud of who you are, if you're not proud of your heritage, you're not proud of yourself as a human, because you can't detach one from the other. It's one and the same. And so this ethnic pride, to me, is simply personal pride. I cannot not be proud of being Cuban, because then I'm not proud of being a human being. I cannot not be proud of being a Latina, because then I'm not proud of being a human being, of being who it's not something that I can detach. I mean, and that's I think what makes this whole journey and this experience wonderful, at least for me personally, the fact that you become all those things, and that they're not something that that is outside of you. It's something, it's you, it's your blood, it's your bones, it's your flesh, it's your thinking, it's your speech, your rhythm, your way of talking, listen to how a poem is read. Your rhythms, your pauses, your, the way you embrace somebody, the way you kiss someone when you meet them, when you could, the way you dress, the way, all of those expressions is what makes you a person. And so if you're not proud of that stuff, then you're not proud of yourself, not as a Cuban, you're not proud of yourself as a human. Right. And that's something I deeply understand. You can reject it, but you're rejecting a beautiful part of yourself. And and you're not going to be whole, because you're always going to be trying to be someone else.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much. Yes, right. Thank you. I definitely want to give enough time to open it up for questions.
I'm sorry.
No,
I sometimes I must seem so old in some ways, because I lived for so long in this universe of the 70s and the 80s and the 60s and the 20s in this Latino, that we used to laugh, and we used to come into the office and go like, Viva la raza, because it was like, somebody pointed it out to me. I remember when I was talking to people about Latinos, how vehement I was about all this stuff. And my sister looked at me one day and said, boy, you really have gotten Viva la raza. I said, yep, I have, I definitely have. But anyway, I'm happy. I swear to you, I had so much information. I had so many things I wanted to talk about, but
no, this is
people
great.
Ask, and maybe I'll be able to tap into some of these things.
Yes,
but go ahead.
No, I definitely wanted to open it up for people who may have questions. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to.
Let me open the chat.
I'm not sure that I see any questions in the chat, but anybody can unmic if you like and ask the first question.
Jonas, questions to everyone. Viva la raza. You got it. Anyway, keep on.
All right. Does anybody would like to ask a question here? I think, Dr. Apodaca, I think you might be muted. Oh, I think you're still muted. There you go. No, we still, I think I can see him talking, but I don't see.
You don't hear him?
Volume. Have him check his volume on his computer.
Yes. Dr. Black, can you check your volume just to make sure? Okay. While he's doing that, we might go, we do have
Let me tell you, while I'm doing, let me tell you an anecdote. I had an editor, his name, when I was doing Latin Music USA. His name is Dick Bartlett, and he is this old gringo hippie gringo. He's a genius. He's a musical genius. He can make anything. And I remember we spent weeks cutting this number from India and Mark Anthony, you know, Vivir lo Nuestro, because we wanted to make it. Was one of my favorite sequences in Latin Music USA. And if that old gringo didn't play that every morning, when I came into the edit room, that's how we started the day. We played Vivir lo Nuestro, we played that sequence, and off he was. He was in love. Another editor used to come by every day at lunchtime, and he would sit there and say, play Shakira. So we would have to go and play Shakira for him. So he would go, turn beat red, run out and go have his lunch because he just couldn't get enough of Shakira. You know, it was, we were kind of the hub. Everybody came to us and everybody had some request that we would have to go in and play. And it was, but I saw people really, to your point of the power of music, transform themselves when, you know, through their relationship to music and learn to love. I mean, they couldn't say Dicen que soy, that piece of indie, that song by India. So he would come in there, you want to listen to that Sin que soy? And I would say, yeah, play the Sin que soy. You know, Dicen que soy, the Sin que soy. And then when we did Latino, I mean, this was, and I'm, you know, the experience of making that will never be replaced, and there'll never be anything like that for me. We had an entire floor, so we called it 7th floor productions in a factory, a converted factory in Boston, and you know, there were 12 of us there in any given day, 12 Latinos, I think, and a Korean. You know, from you know, and we, Ananias, my friend Mary Sullivan, wonderful Mary Sullivan, and every day we went in there, and every day through the massive struggle to make that show, there was such an understanding of purpose and commonality. And, you know, nobody ever, I mean, and some of the editors, there were 2 American editors, and nobody, the differences were non-existent. The cultural difference, there was Nina Alvarez, this woman from El Salvador, who was, you know, far more left than I was. And I was, you know, I'm a Cuban, I'm not that left. And, you know, I mean, I fluctuate depending on the year. And, you know, we were able, there was so much in common that we all had, that all the differences kind of dissipated. They just went away. Okay, Latino heterogeneity in the United States, it's an obstacle for Latinos to gain fair representation in areas such as politics, art, education, and medical services. That's why I think let me answer, I took the last question from Anna Ardelian, Anna?
I think it's Arlene, I think it is.
Arlene, Anna Arlene. Okay, that's, I think, where you can't, well, let me put it this way. You can't do away with the differences. It's just who we are. I mean, there's Mexicans, Dominicans, Cubans, Salvadorans, Puerto Ricans, Colombians, here in Miami, Venezuelans now in greater numbers, Nicaraguans, 0.7%. I got, almost 1%, 0.7% in the United States. You can't, you can't erase that. That's why, in a sense, Latino as a political bloc becomes so important, because it gives you numbers. If something that in building coalitions across nations, across, I mean, I hate to say it this way, but riding the coattails of Mexican Americans in LA with their numbers, and in Texas with their numbers, getting your issues tied into their issues, understanding that this is the politics of minorities, in a sense, political minorities, and that they are made viable by unity, by consensus, by negotiation, and by, that famous Latino giant, by basically by unity. And in a way, that is where Latino as a category, I mean, Hispanic, if you want to use it, I don't, but other people might feel comfortable. That's where that becomes really significant, because it's a strength in the numbers. Locally, you have the strength is in affecting your elections, or selecting people. Cubans did very well in Miami politically until this Donald Trump thing, and they're getting drowned. I mean, so many people are getting losing seats and all that, because Cubans are quite divided, despite of this idea that that they're fighting socialism. Like a friend of mine said to me, well, I didn't know Castro was running. I mean, apparently in Miami, Castro's running for president as a member, in the Democratic Party, because they're acting, as if they were fighting Fidel Castro. But anyway, I don't want to be divisive. Those differences can be bridged by coalitions, and it's the only way to do it. And particularly in places where we're few in numbers, I think coalition building is key, and Latinidad is key as a way to bring the communities together. So the answer is you gotta get with yours, and know that the Nicaraguan guy next door probably is even you may not agree with some of the things he says, is a lot of places where the two of you have interests in common. And so,
Definitely.
Now, next.
Yeah, we have.
What advice? Oh, you want to ask the questions, or you want me to read them? You read the questions.
No, you're fine.
No, because you know how to say the number. I mean,
there is one. So we have Phoebe here. She asked, what is one advice you would give to a young adult like myself to keep my culture?
Just go to celebrations, listen to music, read. I know reading it's a, the old woman's telling me to go, but you're an educated person. You read literature, read narratives, know your heroes, know the stories of the people who came before you. Talk to your uncles and your aunts and your parents. Family is very powerful. Know the narratives of your families, of the ones that came before you. I think there is a richness in our lives that comes from our own family histories that is tremendous. And sometimes we don't take the time to listen to those histories. So much of what I learned from my own culture came from, my grandmother and my aunts and people who regaled you with songs and with narratives and that becomes part of you. So I think that's take as many courses as you can if they're offered, or or make them happen. Create a movie night where you watch documentaries. Start with maybe with some of the larger series, but then start watching individual documentaries. There's wonderful stuff out there. I mean, on Dolores Huerta, on Rita Moreno. Rita Moreno is getting a biography done in American Masters now. Watch West Side Story. Watch. I don't know. Just go, and there is such a depth. We've been making culture now for so many decades that if you go and you dig it up, there'll be a lot of stuff that will remind you of who you are. I would say tacos every Tuesday. Taco Tuesday is a very good thing. No, I'm kidding, but do experiment with with cuisine. I think cuisine, food is so much our soul. I remember someone who worked at my house and loved my dad. She and my dad had a very close relationship. And one day she came to visit, and she brought me a plate of food, and I said, "What is that?" And she said, "Here, I brought you your father albóndigas, la albóndigas de Isidro." And that was sacred for me. It's like the spirit of my dad was in those albóndigas. And I hate albóndigas. But, the culture is so embedded in the everyday thing. The transmission of culture through the family is so profound. It's in what you eat, in what you read, in the pictures you look at, in the stories of the hardship and the successes of people before you. So I would say your family is your first place. It's your, the culture of, I just finished the documentary on this Cuban writer named Jose Lezamalima, who believed profoundly that the transmission of culture rested mostly in the family. Go to your family, go to your family. I think, and then go to the rent movies. Cook. Simple things like that. And read The Decline of the Californians. Leonard, 1970, The Decline of the Californians, or Juan Flores, Ruth Glazer, I think, My Music, My Flag, about the importance of music for Puerto Ricans. Read, so much out there that can connect you to culture. So much.
All right. So I have another question here from Heido. He said, as a first generation college student, what advice do you have?
In terms of what? In terms of career choice, or in terms of how to keep connected to your culture?
I know if you want, you can unmute if you like and just follow up, or it can be just a general answer.
Well, let me just say that I think in terms of your experience, I think you need to imbibe as much as you can from everywhere. I'm not advocating sort of being one thing all the time. I think that it's the pool is always going to be when you're in college, when you're entering that first year where you're exposed to so many people. The pool is always going to be away from the person you bring it's going to be far more loaded with family, with Latinidad and all that, the environment in which you enter. So to me, it's not a question of being exclusively one thing, but I kind of feel that when you're entering an environment that is somewhat foreign, you need to favor, in a sense. You need to try to favor your Latino self a little bit so that you don't forget it along the way, that it's not because the assault is going to be in the other direction. And yes, there's going to be Latino stuff, as I said, in the other direction as well. But try to hang on to some of the Latino stuff. Try to, have a couple of Latino friends. Do, belong to a Latino organization where maybe once a month you get together and you talk about your experiences. Be mindful of those little things that you notice that people do to you or treat you a little differently, because no, you're not paranoid. It's true. It's true. I honestly think that we in every way, all of us, have images and refract our own prejudices onto other people, and so you're going to be feeling some of those prejudices. And if you don't have an accent, you're always going to be a little different, and so beware of that and protect yourself. Cut him some slack, don't cut him too much slack, and hang on to your Latino. Hang on to your Latino, because everything else is sort of gonna throw you slightly away from it.
Anybody else? Like I said, you're more than welcome to post a question in the chat, or you can unmute if you like. But these are great questions. Keep them coming.
I think an oral history of your family is a fantastic thing. I think that I wish I had recorded some of those memories. But yes, I think Jara Hog is a wonderful. That's a wonderful thing to do. The photographs. Make sure that we're living in a very special time now. We're living in a time where, on the one hand, we have all, the new generation embraces and lives diversity more than I think any generation before. But we also live in a time where history is being left behind, because the future feels so new and so different and so detached from the past. I think we have all been sort of in this, bubble of apps, of telephones, of technology, of Instagrams, and whatever else the new iteration of social media is, that we live in the present, and we are looking to the future, which is fine, because we are at the cusp now, I think, of a new century. I think, the new century did not begin in 2000. I think it's now accelerated by COVID and by all of these things that have exposed so much in our societies and have accelerated technology, both at the same time. But understand that regardless of the pool of the future, memory is important, because history is important, culture is important, because ultimately, for me, I'm not a person of faith, but my faith is in the cumulative experience of the human race, of humanity up until this point, is who we are. It's everything. I mean, I feel that if we don't acknowledge and cherish and continue understanding it, we're going to lose our humanity. because you know it's what remains of generations and generations and generations experiences. They're being distilled in what to some of us might seem all things, you know, paintings that, you know, by the masters, classical music. I mean, heck, rock and roll. I was listening to some, you know, Joni Mitchell the other day. I listened to a lot of Joni Mitchell lately, and I look back and I said, oh my God. I mean, this was, you know, 1974. That's like ancient. Well, it isn't, because it's very much part of who we are. Even still, those universal truths, color, feeling, narrative, myths, they're us. And if we let that go, I think we lose our humanity. So I really think we have to preserve history and we have to preserve culture, because everything is a new world, and we're gonna enter it, and we have to carry our human across that line. You know, I mean, I feel that very deeply.
May I add something?
Yeah.
I wanted to mention that games, for me, games are very important to our way of bringing people together through laughter.
Yep.
And so we have a lot of traditional games in Latin America. You know, there's loteria and dominoes, rana.
Oh, yeah.
In Colombia, we have tejo, but it's games that bring laughter and bring people together of all ages. Again, it's that intergenerational gathering that I know in my family, games have been very important at different moments. And so, and laughter, which is again, that loudness, right? The over expressing and the sharing and that, exactly, yes.
Yeah. I mean, you know, we can't, if there is one thing we cannot lose, it's our color. You know, we can't lose our color. You know, and I'm one who, because of my experiences and, you know, I lived in Boston for 30 years, and, you know, I had purple hair and a cellophane. So I had a spike of purple hair on my head when I was in my mid-20s. And, you know, I listened to Annie Lennox, and I listened to, you know, to the Cars, and I listened to, you know, to all that, you know, all the, I mean, I was very punk and all of that. And sometimes, so, you know, and sometimes I would think, oh, salsa, and look at it over my shoulder. You know, eso es de, you know, eso es de cubanos que no, de cubanos y puertorriqueños que no son como yo. Well, fuck, I was so wrong. And that, you know, that was a stage. But I think you begin to lose. It's very easy to lose yourself in the coolness if the coolness doesn't include your culture. Fortunately, and I think that's what, you know, what I was talking about in terms of becoming American, which in many ways is, you know, to young people is what's cool, is becoming current, is that we are so much part of that currency. We, you know, Latino is so cool, you know. I mean, Colombia, when I came to Miami, when I met, you know, I met Juanes, he lives down the street from me here, you know, who's now old and all that because J Balvin just destroyed him, you know, took over. I realized that Colombians were reinventing cool. I mean, Colombians were so profoundly cool. It had to do, of course, with Medellin and the drug culture and the, you know, metal and heavy metal and all that. But you had this great Colombian culture of cool that you could see everywhere in Miami. And that became an alternative. That became an alternative to being, you know, to being, you know, a Seattle alternative, you know, rocker in a sense for a lot of young Latinos coming of age, that Colombia cool. Now you have all that, you know, all that stuff that's coming, you know, all that stuff coming out of Puerto Rico. My God, if I listen to one more, you know, Bad Bunny song, I'm gonna shoot myself. I like it, but you know, it's a secret. I love any of that stuff. Cardi B just burst into the scene. All of a sudden, here was Cardi B, and people say, "Oh, Nicki Minaj." No, Cardi B, and you know, all that stuff. It's destination for you. Destination is cool, or whatever it is you kids call it now. But that's your destination, and you will move in that direction. And you know what has happened in the last decades is that Latino has become part of that destination. Latino is cool. And I think that's very easy. You're probably going like, duh. But in my generation, Latino wasn't cool. Latino era de los viejos. Los jóvenes estaban haciendo otra cosa. Youth was doing something else. All people, you know, dance those things and listen to Celia Cruz. And I mean, you know, that's cosas de viejo. But, you know, no, now you have alternatives. Now you can be, and I think reggaeton had a lot to do with that. I think reggaeton, you know, that, you know, brought to the Latino community at least, and I'm speaking from this side of the universe. I'm sure that Mexican Americans have a similar narrative they can tell you about when it became cool to be, for them, to be Mexican American once again. And I don't mean politically Chicano. I understand that movement, but I mean more recently. And all of a sudden you could be really cool and be very Latino, because the coolest thing was Daddy Yankee. So what the heck? You didn't have, you know, I mean, and so that destination is there, and it's very, very important. I think you guys live in a magnificent world, and you know, I mean, I think everything. I'm listening something here about authenticity. I think authenticity is what you make it, and it is good to be rooted to things that are authentic and profound. But new things can have a great deal of authenticity as long as they come from you and as long as they come from a place of truth. Because your truth is going to include that Latino authenticity. And so I you know, honor the past, embrace the future. That's my advice to you. And, you know, and live any way you want. You can't escape being Latino. That's, you know, essentially I found that out, you know. I can't even, I mean, I live in Miami for a year. I go back up to Boston and I listen to myself when I record narration, and I listened to it and I said, oh my God, listen to that Cubanaza. Who is she? You know, that's just how it is.
All right.
That's just how it is. Anyway.
Well, Dr. Bosch, thank you so much.
I'm sorry. I hope that you know, that my experience meant something for everyone. I'm going to summarize. I'm going to tell you the one thing that I think is key here, and in my experience became really key, is you have a nation. We have a nation, an American nation. And just as African Americans have their own American nation, deeply, profoundly American, that hooks into their narrative, their struggle of slavery, of freedom, you know, of everything, of music and everything that goes with that. So do we. So do we. I mean, that's what you have. That's where I think the intellectual work of becoming and being Latino is, because that's not there so easily, simply because so many of us have come at it from the outside. You know, we bring in our Cubanness, our Nicaraguanness, our, you know, Mexicanness, our, you know, Salvadorianness, and whatever. But I think you need to hook into the larger narrative of America that has to do with Latinos, and that begins, I mean, I hate to say it, in St. Augustine, and then it goes through New Mexico, and then it goes through El Paso, and then it goes through San Antonio, and then it goes through to California and Los Angeles, and even as far north as Sonoma. And that's the intellectual work that I think needs to happen in rescuing your Latinidad. Understand that, like that, the mother of that little girl, that there is a culture here and a history and a narrative that also belongs to you. And then there is 200 years, I mean, 150 years of immigrant history, of cumulative narrative, of cumulative memory, of cumulative contribution, of who made that. Of this little kid going to La Placita in Los Angeles with his father, and his father pointing at Pio Pico's house and tears in his eyes. His father looked at him and said, "Mijo, you see that man who built that house, Pio Pico? He was one of us. Pio Pico was one of us. And know that that greatness is not just, you know, in Pio Pico, but it is in World War II. It is in World War I. It is in, you know, in everything you touch and everything you see. Latinos built LA. Latinos built Texas. Latinos, Puerto Ricans worked, probably thought a lot of the clothes we wore in the garment district in New York. They have designed the things that first ladies wear. They've been brilliant painters, brilliant designers, brilliant musicians, you know, in every walk of life in this America that is our story. We are in the tapestry, woven into that tapestry in every way, in every way. All you have to do is discover, and then know that, and this is Arlo Guthrie, but it's also Lila Downs. This land is your land. So if you fear becoming an American, don't, because you are. You know, America is you. And so, you know, it's a lot of it is being done. I think we need to cherish it, honor it, protect it, and continue it.
Definitely.
Anyway, that's, you know.
Yes. Thank you so much once again. I think we've all learned so much about so many different things, and I think that we can probably move forward with a better idea of what it means to be Latino or Latinx. So
Yeah.
we thank you so much for the time, for being here with us and sharing all.
Oh, you know, again, this weighed heavily on me because I'm used to speaking through my work. And, you know, I'm not that used to speaking through my experience. And, you know, I leave that to the academics and to your professors and, you know, and people who are better at it than I am. But watch Latin Music USA is wonderful.
Yes, it is.
I mean, it is just wonderful. Watch episode 1 and 2 of Latinos, and episode 3 and episode 4 and episode 5. Watch them all. You'll find yourself in so many of those episodes. You'll say, that's my dad. That's my granddad. That's what happened to my grandmother. My grandmother was there. And you will, you know, find your experience in all of those places. But anyway, thank you so very much for putting up with me. I am honored, and I hope that I may at least gave you some direction in, I can send you a reading list, but I gave you some direction in making one point, which is, yes, it's important what you dance, what you eat, what you do, but I think there is some intellectual work that needs to happen, you know, for you to really understand the profound meaning of Latinidad in the United States. And I encourage you to do that.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you all for.
Veronica, I'm gonna put together a reading list. I'm gonna send it to Cesar, and then, you know, and you guys will have access to it. Okay.
Thank you so much. It's been an indeed pleasure.
You know, pleasure, really. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Cesar, thank you very much.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway. What are we doing here? Am I leaving or are you leaving?
Oh, no.
Am I the one? I'm the one who's got to
just-
leave. I don't like to leave.
Yeah.
I always say, I'm always the last one at the party. You know, I'm always like, oh, you know, who's here? You know. Anyway, thank you very much.
No, thank
Take care
you.
of yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.